Yes, welcome. I'm very pleased to be here with Mikko Hypponen. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Close enough.
Close enough, very fine. Thanks for taking the time. You are one of the top 50 experts, if not one of the top experts in the world on cybersecurity issues. This is what I understood.
Well, it's because I've been working in this field longer than most other people. So if you just keep in one area forever, eventually you will become an expert.
It's something like, I think, 25 years you're doing this now?
Yes.
I started back
in 1991, so it's going to be 25 years next year. And those 25 years I've spent with the same company. So I started analyzing viruses for F-Secure in 1991, and I'm still analyzing viruses for F-Secure here in 2015.
Okay, just a side question, but 25 years with the same company, shouldn't you just get outside view, or is it a value of staying there in this field?
No, I don't know. It's clear that you shouldn't take any career advice from me. It's a bad idea to stay with the same company forever. But I've always liked the company, and I've always liked living in Finland, and it's the biggest security company we have in Finland, so that's where I am.
Something else the viewers should know about you as a person?
Well, I don't know. I like my privacy, so there's nothing much more to tell, really.
Okay. So F-Secure is offering what kind of product range?
Well, we are a security software vendor, so we produce endpoint security solutions, including traditional antivirus, anti-spam, anti-phishing solutions. But we are also expanding into new fields, including what we started 15 years ago, which is producing security as a service through operators. So we have right now over 250 operator partners as our customers, including some of the largest, in fact, the largest operators on the planet. And that means that through those partners, we have millions and millions of users every day who run our software on their computers or on their phones who might have never heard of F-Secure. So that makes us sort of like behind the scenes player. And then over the last 2 years, we've expanded greatly into new fields, including mobile VPNs and hybrid VPN solutions. So our fastest growing products right now are things like iPhone and Android security solutions.
Okay. But you would say the main focus is on business-to-business solutions. You're not in the private sector with them.
Most of our consumer customers come through our operator partners.
Okay, interesting. Well, I asked you for this interview to get insights about I think that the two most important topics when we talk about the future of the internet and the future of all these products we hear about all the time. So we all agree that everything is going to be digital. We all agree that everything will be connected and it will be over the internet. But then we have the two issues. First of all, privacy, and then of course we have security. And in this interview, I would like to frame that. What is important, what is not important, as this might have a huge impact on product design and solutions that we will see in the future. So let's start with privacy. What made me curious was the sentence that you said you would be willing to pay for Facebook and Google. What does bring you to this segment?
Well, if we think about how the web has developed, when web really became commonplace a little over 20 years ago, it wasn't obvious in the early days how we consumers will pay for content.
Yeah.
And it could have perfectly well be that we would pay with money, but as we now know, that's not what we do. We go and watch videos, we go and read news, and we don't pay with money. We pay with our data. We pay with us getting profiled and then sold to advertisers. And that's sort of a pity, because it means that we now have a whole generation of people who have learned the idea that we are supposed to pay for content online with our privacy. And it could be something else. It could be that we pay with the old-fashioned way, which would be paying with money. But right now, we don't have an option. I mean, there's no way for me to pay for Facebook with money. There's no way for me to pay for Google search with money, even if I wanted to. The only way we can pay is with our privacy, and we have no other choice. I tried living without Google, and I can tell you that it just cannot be done. It can't be done.
You could live without Facebook?
Well, I actually am not on Facebook.
Not on Facebook.
But I'll tell you, even that is painful in the sense that I am out of the loop. Like when I speak with my friends and family, someone has divorced, and I have no idea. Everyone else knows because they're on Facebook, but I know that nobody remembers to tell me. Or there's a party, and everyone's there, and I have no idea that there's a party because I'm on Facebook. So you do miss out on some aspects of life for deciding not to be on Facebook.
You could drop Twitter?
Twitter is a little bit different because on Twitter nobody really expects you to follow you back. The problem I have with Facebook really isn't the privacy implications as much as practical problems. You see, I work in hunting criminals, so we actually take down real criminals who actually go to jail. And that means I have to take some personal precautions, which means if I would go onto Facebook, my aunts and uncles would want to friend me, of course, because I would be there. And it would be very hard to tell them, but sorry, uncle, I can't friend you because then it would be too easy to track where I am and, for example, figure out if I have a family or where I live. So that's a practical restriction for not being on Facebook. And it's totally different on Twitter. Nobody really expects you to follow anybody back, and you can't map people's networks from Twitter as easily.
So basically, you paying for Facebook or Google or Twitter is one way of getting back your privacy, and you are owning the asset class of your own data. And this made me think a bit that it could in the end result into a two-tier data owner approach. So we have these people that can afford to pay for it, or simply will pay because of the circumstances that you described it. And there are those that simply cannot afford to pay. So
I don't think that's the way it works.
Okay.
It wouldn't be that expensive. The internet has such a huge amount of users that the amount of money we're talking about is trivial. Like, you want to read this news article, click here and you pay half a cent for it, for example. And half a cent for a news article, if everybody pays it, that would easily make up the money they are now making with profiling their users and selling to advertisers. The thing that we're missing is that there's no way for us technically to pay half a cent. We don't have micropayment systems in our browsers. That's the thing that never materialized. This could have happened 20 years ago. I mean, Netscape browser from 1995 could have had a payment button, but it didn't. If it would have, we would live in a different internet today.
Okay. Why didn't it happen?
Because micropayment systems are hard. We didn't have virtual currencies that actually worked in 1995.
So it was really a technology issue and not something...
It wasn't for the lack of trying. For example, DigiCash really tried making virtual payments a reality already in the 1990s, but it just failed. What we have today is that for the first time we have an infrastructure that would actually enable micropayments, and that of course is blockchain and Bitcoin.
I mean, another argument you very often hear in this context, and this is discussed in Germany very often, where the privacy debate, at least in my opinion, sometimes it's even out of balance, is that in the end we are better off entrusting the companies than the government. So because Google might collect all the data, but they would actually not try to use it in that way against you because they will sell a product to you. Is this something that you find reasonable, or are there some hidden dangers we are just simply not thinking of?
Well, it's quite clear that Google doesn't want to try to hurt you. It's not in their interest to hurt you. Exactly the contrary. It's in their interest to keep you using their services as long as possible, as much as possible. So they try to avoid of doing anything that would actually alienate the users. Same thing applies to any other service that is monetized by ads and profiling. Now, governments aren't out to hurt you either. Of course, the governments are interested only in things that they believe are necessary for surveillance purposes, for law enforcement purposes, and for intelligence gathering purposes. They have no interest in trying to harm innocent citizens either. But of course,
But they're always interested in power and control.
That's
and information
right.
is.
And that's what people worry about. And that's what people are more likely to trust companies than governments. But there is, of course, the problem that governments can force companies to cooperate. And if you look at Snowden leaks and look at what the US government is doing with the US cloud providers and US social media providers, well, that's exactly the problem, that these companies are so good in collecting data that the government doesn't need to collect the data. They can come to these companies and get it from there.
I mean, any other issue in the privacy debate you would like to put on the agenda that is normally not discussed in public? Something that comes to your mind? Or?
Well, it's the old claim that we don't have to worry about this because we have nothing to hide. And I've always said the same thing, that, I have nothing to hide. I'm a law-abiding citizen. But even though if I have nothing to hide, I'm still not interested in volunteering my information to intelligence agencies, especially to foreign intelligence agencies. And we Europeans, well, we use American services for everything.
Yeah.
All the cloud storage systems, all the operating systems, all the search engines, it's all in USA. And US law grants us no privacy rights whatsoever. So when we use American services, we volunteer our data away. And that's a pity. And it's a pity especially because how come Europe is unable to compete? How come we can't make .com companies out of Europe?
Exactly, that's a very interesting question.
It's a great question, and we have no good answers. The web was invented here. It was invented in Switzerland. Where are all the technology companies out of Europe? We have one large technology company in Europe. One. And that's SAP.
Yeah.
That's the only one. Everyone else is like tiny compared to the Amazons and Googles and Microsofts and Apples.
Okay, before we pick up this topic, because that's the third part and it's a very interesting part, let's come to the second issue, cybersecurity. So most people have the idea that it's simply about either being hacked by some script kid or maybe some terrorist attacks. For that we can justify surveillance. But I think your view on the cybersecurity threats is just very much more pronounced. Yeah. So what would you how would you map that out? Where are the threats and on what level?
Well, we clearly have totally different attackers.
Yeah.
All the range comes all the way from hacktivists, anonymous guys, all the way to extremist movement and Islamic State, and in the middle we have governmental attacks as well as criminal attacks.
Yeah.
But then when you look at the size of these problems, criminals are clearly the biggest problem.
Okay.
Over 90% of the attacks that we see are coming from criminals, and they are trying to make money with their attacks. So yes, there are other attacks as well, but money-making attacks continues to be the biggest problem, both for consumers as well as for companies and organizations. And the crucial part for anybody that's trying to protect their organization is to do threat modeling and threat assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, think about who are we? What is valuable in our organization? Who would be interested in this? Because it's not the same for all organizations. If you are, I don't know, a restaurant, your threat model is completely different from a defense contractor. It's completely different from a foreign ministry. So it depends on who you are. And then once you have mapped the potential attackers and graded them on the level of severity and likelihood, then you can start putting your limited resources into the right places to protect yourself.
And as I understood, you're fearing that the threat level here is just increasing on two ways. So on the one side, because we are connecting more and more devices, so this is kind of a technical aspect. But on the other side, because we see that brain power is moving in more extreme directions at the moment.
Right. Yes, it's both. Exactly. So obviously IoT and connected devices is a huge player here. And the reason why we have so many headaches coming out of IoT world is that for many of these devices, security is not a selling point. Think about household appliances. You go and buy a fridge. Nowadays, fridges are connected to the internet, but that's not really a selling point. You're buying it not because of the security features, you're buying it because it's a fridge. And the price of these devices is the most important factor, which means that the vendors will invest the minimum amount possible for security features to keep it cheap enough. And that's a bad combination when you have connected devices which are coming from companies which have no previous know-how of security engineering, and they are trying to build secure systems with the minimum investment. It's no wonder we have problems. And one thing that people often misunderstand about the security risks of IoT is that the devices themselves are not the target of the attackers. They're not trying to hack your fridge or your light bulbs or your toasters or your whatever. They are using them as vectors to get where they want to go. We found several IoT devices which can easily be hacked to steal the passwords to your private network.
Or they can pay you money, things like that.
Exactly. So it's a vector.
But after we mapped out these two big threat areas, and you already introduced that problem, what are the solutions? Because we have various levels on the private area, between companies, but also with the government. And I think the first layer I would worry about is a bit, do we really have the knowledge in Europe to kind of, first of all, approach it in a systematic way?
Well, it could be better. Once again, most of the security vendors worldwide are coming from the United States, but we also have large vendors coming from China, coming from Russia. And then you have this problem like who do you trust? Do you trust all of your data to an American company or Chinese company or Russian company? There are very few players coming from what people would typically see as neutral countries. And that's of course some sort of a business opportunity for us coming from Finland, which many people would view as a neutral country. But there are different solutions for privacy problems and for security problems. For privacy, encryption. Encryption works. To quote Edward Snowden, encryption works. And that's also the reason why governments, especially UK and USA government, are lately being so active in trying to restrict strong encryption. And that's idiotic. It is not going to work. And the reason why it's not going to work is that the cat is already out of the bag. The way of doing uncrackable encryption is public knowledge. It's taught in every university, which means if you're going to pass laws which will outlaw strong encryption, the people who will follow the law will only be the law-abiding citizens. And the bad people, they are already breaking the laws. They will break this law too. So if you outlaw strong encryption, only outlaws will have strong encryption.
And I mean, as we could see from the NSA story so far, we really have to, analyzing it, we have to understand that it's not about prevention, as they always tell us. It's actually about law enforcement. Once they know who is the criminal, they have all the data at once.
Yes, and it's also about power. Like if you collect power, if you collect information about all of us, you get so much power over us. So, someone who's not really a person of interest today might be a person of interest or a powerful person 20 years from now. And if intelligence agencies have 20 years worth of communication and searches and links, they can easily find something to twist your arm if they need to. That's power.
I mean, with the recent debate in Europe that we should do something, we should have the own solutions. I mean, one way would be to kind of create cool companies. Could be startups, but I would not only limit it to startups. The other approach is the old European way of doing it, which I feel to some degree could be a reverse back to national silos.
Right.
So what is your view on that?
I don't like national silos either. I just wish there would be better organic solutions from within Europe coming out without restricting these open markets artificially. And so we have to stop selling our best startups and our best technology companies abroad, and we have to keep our brains here. Some of the best minds who want to go and start great new startups who are coming from Europe, the very first thing they do is that they move to Silicon Valley, and then they start their startup. So, and that's a problem. That's that we somehow should be able to fix, and that's why it's good to be here at Web Summit, because things like these are exactly the kind of things we should be doing.
I mean, since we are at Web Summit, so if you would have to give an advice to young startups, which area in cybersecurity they should look at, and what might be a collaboration way of growing with F-Secure?
There's multiple very fast-growing areas in security. Basically, you can just choose any niche and just focus on that, and you will be able to come up with a business plan that will work. The only ones which are really hard to penetrate anymore are the traditional old-school security features like antivirus. It's hard to build an antivirus from scratch because of the legacy problem, which is hard to solve by a startup. But for example, securing IoT. We have no good solutions for securing IoT from any vendor at the moment. There will be solutions coming out very quickly from many vendors. We are building one ourselves, but there's clearly room for fast-moving
Bosch is
startups.
building a platform, I heard yesterday.
All right, so that's a good example as well. And IoT as a field obviously is going to require a lot of cooperation between other companies, and we're very open with cooperation from various kind of companies. So that's clearly a growth area. Another is security solutions for consumers which are easy to use. It's still way too hard to encrypt your stuff. It's still way too hard to encrypt your email. Still way too hard to do a practical level of security. So to make that easier, to make it something that anybody can use, if you can do that, you are in good shape.
Is there some risk we simply have to live with? We will not find a solution from the technical side?
Clearly, we can't solve all problems. I cannot provide you with 100% security. If I could, I would, but I can't, so I won't. That's just something to be accepted. But you know what? We don't have perfect security in the real world as well.
Sure.
So we must accept some level of risk in the online world as well.
I know you're very protective about your privacy, but how can you relax in Finland with all this issues you're thinking about and you're pointing out correctly.
Right. Well, I don't know. I do a lot of gardening. That's my hobby. But in Finland, the problem is you can only do gardening 6 months of the year because then you have snow 6 months of the year. So when it's snowing, my other hobby, my indoors hobby, is collecting and restoring classic coin-operated video games and pinballs. So I buy old broken machines and I fix them and I play my games. And that's what I really enjoy doing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you.
Have a great Web Summit.
Thank you.
Thanks.